My name is Gwen, and I am 32 years old. At my sister Madison's extravagant engagement dinner, my mother introduced me to the groom's ultra-wealthy family with a dismissive wave of her hand. She said, "This is our other daughter, she just cleans houses for a living." My father quickly added that they had completely given up on me. The groom's mother froze her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. She looked me dead in the eye and whispered that I was the Wall Street ghost. She went entirely quiet, and the whole table locked up while my mother lost all color in her face. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your family underestimate your true power. The private dining room at La Maison was suffocatingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the roasted duck and imported truffles, but the atmosphere at the table was entirely icy. My parents, Richard and Catherine, had spent the last hour desperately trying to impress DeAndre and his mother, Sylvia. DeAndre came from one of the most powerful African-American real estate dynasties on the East Coast. He wore a custom-tailored suit and an arrogant smirk, clearly enjoying how my parents fawned over his every word. Madison sat beside him, flashing her massive diamond ring and pretending to be the perfect elegant bride-to-be. I sat at the far end of the table nursing a glass of sparkling water. I was only invited because leaving me out would prompt unwanted questions from DeAndre's family about family unity. My mother leaned across the table, her fake smile stretching thin. "Sylvia," Catherine purred. "Madison is already looking at country club memberships for the two of them. We raised her to understand the finer things in life, to be a true asset to a powerful man like DeAndre." Sylvia, a sharp African-American billionaire matriarch who commanded respect without even raising her voice, nodded politely. She possessed an intimidating presence, her gaze analytical and calculating. "And what about your other daughter?" Sylvia asked, turning her piercing eyes toward me. "Gwen, is it what line of business are you in?" Before I could even open my mouth, Madison let out a high-pitched, mocking laugh. "Oh, Gwen is not in business, Sylvia. She does manual labor." My mother immediately jumped in, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Yes, unfortunately, Gwen never quite found her footing. This is our other daughter, she just cleans houses for a living. She scrubs floors. We tried to push her toward a respectable career, but some people simply lack ambition." My father scoffed, taking a sip of his wine. "We have given up on her, to be completely honest. We focus all our energy on Madison now. She is the true pride of our family." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply looked at them. They loved pushing this narrative. 10 years ago, when they abruptly cut off my college tuition to buy Madison a luxury sports car, I did clean houses to survive. I scrubbed toilets and wiped down baseboards to pay for my accounting and finance degrees. I never asked them for another dime. They still believed I was pushing a mop because I refused to share my life with them. They had absolutely no idea that my firm, Apex Estate Holdings, was currently the most ruthless financial auditing and asset liquidation company in the country. We bought bad debt and restructured failing empires for the ultra-wealthy. Sylvia did not laugh with them. Instead, her posture stiffened. She leaned forward, squinting at me through the candlelight. The polite smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer terror. She reached for her champagne glass, but her hand trembled so violently that the crystal slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash, shattering into dozens of pieces. The entire table jumped. DeAndre frowned, looking at his mother in confusion. "Mom, are you all right?" Sylvia ignored him. She was staring dead at me, all the color draining from her usually composed face. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You are Gwen. Gwen from Apex Holdings. You are the Wall Street ghost." The nickname made my mother frown. "What on earth is a Wall Street ghost?" Catherine asked, letting out a nervous chuckle. "Sylvia, I assure you she just handles cleaning supplies." Sylvia slowly stood up from her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Shut up, Catherine," Sylvia snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "Do you have any idea who your daughter is? My family firm just paid Apex Estate Holdings $4 million to audit our entire corporate trust. She is the CEO. She holds the power to liquidate assets worth billions. She is not a maid. She is the woman currently deciding if my family keeps our commercial real estate portfolio." The silence that followed was absolute. Madison's jaw dropped. She looked from Sylvia to me, her perfectly contoured face twisting in disbelief. That is impossible, Madison stammered. Gwen lives in a cheap apartment. She wears off-the-rack clothes. She is lying, Sylvia. She is just trying to embarrass me at my own engagement dinner. I finally set my water glass down. The clink echoed loudly in the dead quiet room. I do live simply, Madison, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Because unlike you, I do not need to wear my bank account on my sleeve to feel valuable. And Sylvia is entirely correct. I am the founder of Apex. I clean up financial disasters. And speaking of disasters, DeAndre, we have a massive one to discuss. DeAndre puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his arrogant facade. I have no idea what you are talking about. My finances are flawless. Madison and I are building a legacy. I reached into my leather briefcase resting beside my chair and pulled out a thick, red-tabbed audit file. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed right next to the floral centerpiece. No, DeAndre, you are building a crime scene, I stated coldly. My software completed the initial sweep of your joint accounts this afternoon. Madison has been embezzling funds from your family trust for the past 6 months. She has siphoned over $300,000 into offshore shell accounts to fund her designer shopping habits and to pay off my parents' secret debts. DeAndre's eyes widened in horror. He snatched the file and ripped it open, his eyes scanning the highlighted bank transfers. Madison let out a shrill scream, lunging across the table to grab the papers. DeAndre, do not look at that. She faked it. She manufactured those documents because she is jealous of us. My father stood up, his face purple with rage. Gwen, how dare you forge financial documents to ruin your sister's big night? I demand you apologize and leave this restaurant immediately. You are a disgrace to this family. I stood up smoothly, buttoning my blazer. I am not apologizing for doing my job, Richard. The evidence is undeniable. Every wire transfer leads directly to the mortgage company holding the deed to your house. You raised a thief and you funded your lifestyle with stolen money. Sylvia looked at Madison with pure disgust. The engagement is over, DeAndre. We are leaving, and we are pressing charges. But Mom, DeAndre pleaded, panic setting in. We can fix this. I picked up my briefcase, looking down at my family as they descended into a frantic, screaming panic. Madison was sobbing, clutching DeAndre's arm while he aggressively pushed her away. My parents were babbling, trying to convince Sylvia it was a clerical error. You were right about one thing, Mother, I said, my voice slicing through their pathetic shouting. I do clean up trash for a living. And I just took the trash out of my life. I turned and walked out of the private dining room, leaving them to drown in the consequences of their own arrogance. The heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant slammed shut behind me, but they could not muffle the absolute chaos erupting inside the private dining room. I had barely taken 10 steps down the carpeted hallway when the doors burst open again. Sylvia stormed out, her designer heels clicking frantically against the marble border. She was clutching her phone to her ear, her face completely drained of its usual commanding warmth. She looked like she had seen a ghost, which was fitting since that was exactly what she called me. Sylvia shouted my name, her voice cracking with an unfamiliar desperation. Gwen, wait, you cannot just leave this here. I paused, turning slowly to face her. My mother, Catherine, and my father, Richard, spilled out of the dining room right behind her, dragging a hysterical Madison and a thoroughly confused DeAndre. Catherine reached out, trying to grab Sylvia by the arm, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Sylvia, please, Catherine begged, her voice high and annoying. Do not let Gwen ruin this beautiful evening. She is mentally unstable. She just cleans houses, I swear to you. She probably stole those documents from some dumpster. Sylvia ripped her arm out of Catherine, grasping hands with such violent force that my mother stumbled backward. Are you out of your mind? Sylvia roared, her voice echoing down the elegant corridor. Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you have any idea who your daughter actually is? Richard puffed out his chest, stepping forward to defend his wife. She is a disappointment, Sylvia. That is what she is. We cut her off years ago. Sylvia looked at my parents with absolute disgust. She raised her trembling hand, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. That woman is not a maid, Richard. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Estate Holdings. She is the Wall Street ghost. My family firm just wired her company $4 million to conduct a forensic audit of our entire corporate trust. Madison let out a shrill, mocking laugh, clinging to DeAndre tightly. That is impossible. Gwen lives in a cheap apartment. She wears off-the-rack suits. She is a nobody. Sylvia rounded on Madison, her eyes blazing with absolute fury. You stupid, arrogant little girl. You think wealth is about flashy diamonds and leased sports cars. Gwen holds the power to liquidate assets worth billions. She controls a network of financial investigators that even the federal government relies on. And she just handed me undeniable proof that you have been siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from my son. DeAndre stared at his mother, his confident upper-class demeanor crumbling into raw panic. "Mom, what are you saying?" DeAndre asked, his voice shaking. Madison said she needed those funds for wedding deposits and charitable donations. She told me her family was temporarily illiquid. Sylvia let out a harsh, barking laugh. Illiquid. DeAndre, they are bankrupt. Gwen outlined every single wire transfer in that audit file. Madison took your money and funneled it directly to the mortgage company holding the deed to Richard and Catherine House. They are thieves, DeAndre. You are marrying into a family of grifters. I watched the realization wash over DeAndre's face. The elite, powerful heir to a real estate dynasty suddenly looked like a frightened child. He turned to Madison, his eyes wide with profound betrayal. You stole from my family trust. You used my money to pay your parents' secret debts. Madison burst into tears, her flawless makeup running down her cheeks. DeAndre, please, it was just a loan. I was going to pay it back. Gwen manipulated the numbers to make it look worse. She hates me because I'm getting married and she is entirely alone. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through her pathetic sobbing like a sharp scalpel. I do not manipulate numbers, Madison. I expose them. The audit software tracks internet protocol addresses, routing numbers, and offshore shell accounts. You tried to hide the theft by routing the money through a fake charity, but you forgot that Apex monitors the entire banking network. Catherine lunged toward me, her face contorted with intense rage. You vicious, jealous creature, Catherine screamed. You did this on purpose. You waited until the engagement dinner to destroy your sister and her life. I will sue you for everything you have. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. You cannot sue me with money you do not have, Catherine. And since Madison committed wire fraud across state lines to pay your mortgage, you are legally an accessory to federal financial crimes. Sylvia raised her phone, tapping the screen with shaking fingers. My legal team is already reviewing the file you left on the table, Gwen. They confirm the routing numbers match perfectly. I am calling the authorities. The engagement is completely off. DeAndre, get in the car. We are leaving right now. But Mom, DeAndre pleaded, his pride fighting a losing battle against his mother commanding authority. We have guests arriving next week. The social fallout will be a massive disaster. Sylvia grabbed her son by the lapels of his custom suit. The social fallout of marrying a convicted felon will be a lot worse, DeAndre. We are cutting our losses immediately. Sylvia turned back to me, her expression shifting from rage to a cautious, almost fearful respect. Gwen, she said, her voice dropping to a serious professional tone. I apologize for my behavior earlier. We hired Apex because of your reputation for being ruthless and thorough. I see now that the reputation is entirely justified. Will you personally oversee the recovery of our stolen funds? I adjusted the strap of my leather briefcase on my shoulder. My firm requires a 30% recovery fee. Sylvia. Since the funds were funneled into real estate, I will be putting a lien on Richard and Catherine property first thing tomorrow morning. Richard let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest. You cannot take our home. We raised you. I looked at the man who had called me a disappointment my entire life. You raised a house cleaner, Richard, and I am simply doing my job. I am cleaning up the mess you made. Madison dropped to her knees right there in the restaurant hallway, sobbing uncontrollably. DeAndre physically shoved her away when she tried to grab his pant leg, turning his back on her completely. Sylvia signaled her private security detail, who immediately stepped between DeAndre and my hysterical family. I did not wait to watch the rest of their pathetic meltdown. I turned on my heel and walked out the glass front doors of the restaurant into the cool night air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a secure alert from my chief operations officer. The message was brief and urgent. The system just flagged another massive unauthorized transfer from DeAndre accounts, but this one was authorized by DeAndre himself, sent directly to a high-risk offshore account 10 minutes ago. I stopped dead in my tracks on the sidewalk. Madison was not the only one stealing. DeAndre was hiding something massive, and he was using Madison as his perfect idiotic scapegoat. The real game had just begun. This realization sent a cold thrill right through my veins. They all believed that they were playing me, but they had absolutely no idea that I held all the cards. I quickly typed a highly encrypted message back to my executive team, commanding them to trace the offshore routing numbers immediately. I wanted every single financial footprint that DeAndre had ever left on the dark web mapped out before midnight. My parents were completely ruined. My sister was facing federal prison, but this new discovery meant I was about to dismantle an entire real estate dynasty from the inside out. I flagged a passing taxi and slipped into the back seat, watching the neon lights of the city blur past the window. My phone illuminated the dark cab with another notification. Sylvia was trying to call me directly. I ignored it, letting it ring out. They wanted to use me to clean their messes, but they were about to find out that a ghost does not take orders from anyone. I watched the incoming call from Sylvia time out on my screen. The silence in the taxi was a sharp contrast to the screaming match I had just left behind at the restaurant. My fingers flew across my encrypted tablet. I initiated a deep dive trace on the offshore account DeAndre had just wired funds to. The routing numbers bounced from the Cayman Islands to Luxembourg before settling in a shell corporation registered in Panama. He was bleeding his own family trust dry, preparing to flee before his mother's financial empire collapsed. Madison was nothing but a convenient distraction for him. The next morning, the polished glass doors of Apex Estate Holdings slid open. I walked across the Italian marble lobby of my headquarters. My chief operations officer handed me a fresh espresso and a sealed black folder. The trace was complete. Not only was DeAndre stealing, but he had used Madison's forged signature to authorize the transfer. He was setting my sister up to take the fall for federal wire fraud. Before I could even review the final page, the security alarms at the front reception desk blared. I turned around to see my mother Catherine, my father Richard, and a completely disheveled Madison shoving their way past my security guards. They had actually tracked me down. Madison's eyes were bloodshot, her designer dress from last night replaced by wrinkled sweatpants, but her arrogant attitude remained entirely intact. Catherine marched right up to the security turnstiles, slamming her fist against the reinforced glass. She glared at me, her face twisting into a furious sneer. "You think you can run away after the stunt you pulled last night?" Catherine yelled, her voice echoing across the expansive lobby. "Tell your rent-a-cops to let us through. We demand to speak to your manager. You are in severe trouble for stealing those fake financial documents." I gestured for my security team to stand down and let them through the gates. They stomped into my private elevator, completely oblivious to the fact that the name on the building matched the name on my birth certificate. They still thought Sylvia had been joking. They still believed I was just a low-level employee playing a cruel prank. The elevator doors opened to my executive boardroom on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city skyline. Madison scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Wow, your boss has a nice office." Madison mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "Too bad you are going to be fired the second we tell them you forged a bank audit to ruin my engagement. DeAndre told me everything last night. He said you hacked his accounts to make it look like I stole from him. He promised we are still getting married." Richard pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You are a jealous, bitter woman. We gave you everything and you repay us by trying to destroy your sister's future. DeAndre's family is real estate royalty. We are not leaving this building until you sign a full written confession stating that you fabricated that entire file. If you refuse, we are calling the police." I walked over to the massive oak conference table and took my seat at the head of the boardroom. I did not invite them to sit. I opened the black folder my operations officer had just handed me. I pulled out the original unredacted audit logs and slammed them onto the table. The heavy thud made Madison jump. "I am the manager, Catherine," I stated coldly, leaning back in my leather chair. "I own this building. I own the software that caught your precious daughter embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from DeAndre's joint accounts." and I did not forge a single digit. Madison snatched the papers off the table, her eyes darting across the highlighted transactions. She let out a breathless, mocking laugh, desperately trying to maintain her delusion. This proves absolutely nothing. DeAndre gave me access to those accounts. I am his future wife. I am entitled to that money to cover our wedding expenses. You are just a house cleaner playing pretend in a borrowed office. I tapped a button on my tablet, projecting the bank routing details onto the massive digital screen behind me. You did not use that money for wedding expenses, Madison. You routed $200,000 directly to the collection agency handling the second mortgage on Richard and Catherine's house. You stole from the joint account to save our parents from imminent foreclosure. The transaction is right there on the screen bearing your digital signature. Richard lost all the color in his face. He stumbled backward, bumping into the glass wall. Catherine gasped, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her chest. How did you get that information? Catherine stammered, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. That was supposed to be a private loan. Madison promised she got the money legally. Legally, I repeated, my voice laced with absolute contempt. Nothing about your lives is legal. You spent my college tuition to buy Madison a sports car, and when you ran out of cash to fund your fake upper-class lifestyle, you took out a second mortgage you could not afford. Now you are using stolen money to keep a roof over your heads. Madison slammed her hands onto the boardroom table, tears of pure rage spilling over her eyelashes. DeAndre knows I took the money to help my family. Madison screamed, her voice cracking. He loves me. He told me last night that he forgives me, and that we are moving up the wedding to this weekend to prove to his mother that our bond is unbreakable. You failed, Gwen. You tried to ruin my life, but I am still marrying into a billionaire dynasty. I let out a slow, dark laugh that chilled the room. I picked up the second page of the audit report and slid it across the table toward her. You really are the most gullible target he could have ever asked for. Look at the bottom of that page, Madison. Look at the transfer initiated at midnight last night, right after Sylvia called off the engagement. Madison grabbed the paper, her hands shaking violently. Her eyes widened in sheer panic as she read the numbers. What is this? She whispered. What does this mean? It means DeAndre is playing you for a complete fool, I explained ruthlessly. While he was comforting you and promising to move up the wedding, he used your digital authorization credentials to wire an additional $5 million from his mother's corporate trust into an untraceable offshore account in Panama. He is stealing from his own family empire, and he just framed you for federal wire fraud. Catherine let out a piercing shriek, grabbing her chest as if she had been physically struck. No, that cannot be true. DeAndre is a respectable man. He would never do such a thing to my daughter. He already did, Catherine. I stood up, towering over them with absolute authority. And because Madison used the same routing protocol address to pay off your mortgage, the federal authorities are going to link your house directly to the massive embezzlement scheme. You are not just completely broke right now, you are all going to federal prison together. Richard lunged across the table, desperately trying to grab the audit file, but my highly trained security team immediately stepped into the boardroom, blocking his path instantly. Gwen, you have to fix this. Richard pleaded, his arrogance completely evaporating into pathetic desperation. You understand financial systems deeply. You can delete these records right now. You have to protect your family from this disaster. I looked at the man who had called me a disappointment just 12 hours ago. I am not your family, Richard. I am the lead auditor. And my exact job is to clean out the absolute worst rot from the system. Get out of my building right now before I have all three of you arrested. The heavy silence in the boardroom was broken only by Catherine's frantic gasps for air. Richard stood frozen, his hands still suspended in the air where he had been pointing at me moments before. My security team stepped forward, their presence an undeniable threat. But before they could place a hand on my father, the frosted glass doors of the boardroom violently swung open again. DeAndre stormed into the room, his expensive designer overcoat unbuttoned and his face contorted with rage. He had tracked Madison here entirely desperate to control the narrative before his own massive theft was completely exposed. Madison let out a theatrical wail the second she saw him. She sprinted across the room and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face into his chest. DeAndre, you have to stop her. Madison sobbed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. Gwen is trying to frame both of us. She manipulated the banking records to make it look like you stole $5 million from your mother. She is a complete psychopath. DeAndre wrapped one arm around Madison, protectively glaring at me with absolute venom. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the dominant aura of a billionaire real estate heir who was entirely used to bullying anyone beneath his elite tax bracket. You are stepping into territory you do not understand, Gwen. DeAndre barked, his voice dripping with condescension. My mother might have been spooked by your little parlor tricks last night, but I am not. You are just a glorified accountant playing with software. You have absolutely zero proof that I touched my family trust. I am giving you exactly 5 seconds to retract these fabricated files before I unleash my legal team and wipe your pathetic company off the map. I did not break eye contact. I remained seated in my leather chair, perfectly composed, watching his pathetic display of false bravado. I tapped a single key on my tablet. The massive digital screen behind me shifted from the routing numbers to a high-resolution security image. The entire room turned to look. It was a photograph captured by an automated teller camera in the financial district, time-stamped exactly at midnight. It clearly showed DeAndre sitting in the back of his chauffeured vehicle, holding his secure banking token to his face for a biometric retinal scan. Right next to the photo was the digital ledger confirming that exact retinal scan authorized the $5 million wire transfer to Panama. You cannot fake biometric verification, DeAndre, I stated coldly. The federal financial database logged your retinal scan the exact second the funds moved offshore. You panicked when your mother called off the engagement, realized your access to the family accounts was about to be frozen, and decided to loot the vault before you lost the keys. DeAndre's face lost every drop of color. He physically shoved Madison away from him, stumbling backward as if the digital screen had radiated actual heat. That is illegal surveillance. DeAndre stammered, his confident facade shattering into millions of jagged pieces. You hacked my personal device. I did not hack anything, I corrected smoothly. Your mother signed an emergency audit authorization last night. That signature gave my firm absolute legal authority to pull all security data linked to her corporate accounts. You handed me the murder weapon, and now you are complaining that I found your fingerprints on it. Madison stared at DeAndre, the horrifying reality finally sinking into her thick skull. You actually did it, Madison whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and terror. You stole from Sylvia, and you used my digital signature to cover your tracks. You were going to let me go to federal prison for your crime. DeAndre ignored her completely. He looked around the boardroom like a trapped animal, realizing there was no way out. Richard stepped forward, grabbing DeAndre by the shoulder. You arrogant fool! Richard yelled, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. You promised me that the money you gave us to pay off the mortgage was clean. You promised me our house was safe. We trusted you. I stood up from my chair, the sudden movement silencing their pathetic squabbling. Your house was never safe, Richard. I announced, my voice slicing through the room like a blade. You willingly accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from a man you barely knew just to maintain your illusion of wealth. You are all equally guilty of financial fraud. My security team moved in closer, surrounding the four of them. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the private exit at the back of the boardroom. Wait! Catherine cried out, rushing forward and hitting the chest of a massive security guard. Gwen, you cannot leave us like this. We are your family. You have the power to delete these records. You have to save us. I paused at the door, looking back at the people who had made my entire existence a living hell. You told Sylvia that I just clean houses for a living. I said, my tone completely void of any sympathy. You were absolutely right. I am a cleaner. And I am finally taking the trash out of my life. I pushed the door open and walked out, letting the heavy wood seal shut behind me. The muffled sounds of their screaming matches instantly filled the hallway, but I did not look back. I strode down the executive corridor toward the private elevator. Just as I pressed the call button, the secure phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out, watching a live notification flash across the screen. It was an automated alert from my asset acquisition department. The foreclosure order on Richard and Catherine Mansion had just been legally executed by the state court. The deed had officially transferred to Apex Estate Holdings. Back in the boardroom, I knew exactly what was happening. Richard's phone would be ringing. His bank would be informing him that he was officially homeless and that he had less than 24 hours to vacate the premises before law enforcement physically removed him. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to reveal the polished steel interior. I stepped inside, pressing the heavy metal button for the underground parking garage. The descent was smooth, silent, and incredibly satisfying. The empire I had meticulously built from absolute nothing was operating exactly as designed. The very people who had tried to bury me alive were now suffocating under the crushing weight of their own boundless greed. I checked my watch, knowing the timing was flawless. The ultimate public reckoning was only just beginning, and I was holding every single match ready to burn their fake high society world directly to the ground. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my public intake office. While Apex Estate Holdings operated out of a glass skyscraper downtown, I maintained this small storefront to handle low-level corporate filings. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard temporary staffing agency. It was the only address my family had for me, a place they mocked as a pathetic establishment for minimum wage workers. I was reviewing the final foreclosure documents for my parents' estate when the cheap reception door flew open with a violent crash. Madison stomped into the reception area, her face flushed red with unhinged fury. She was closely followed by Catherine and Richard, who looked like they had not slept a second since the disastrous confrontation yesterday. They ignored my front desk manager and marched into my private office, slamming the door behind them. Madison slammed her palms onto my inexpensive laminate desk, her engagement ring glaring under the fluorescent lights. "You are going to fix this right now!" Madison shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. "You are going to pick up that phone call, Sylvia, and tell her that entire presentation yesterday was a pathetic prank. You are going to admit that you rented that fancy boardroom and hired those fake security guards just to ruin my life." I leaned back in my simple office chair, folding my hands together. Their absolute capacity for sheer denial was fascinating. They had seen the bank routing numbers and the federal audit trails. Yet their elitist brains simply could not compute that the daughter they treated like garbage was actually holding the executioner's axe. "You think I rented a multi-million-dollar corporate floor just to play a prank on you?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Richard stepped forward, jabbing his finger in my direction. "DeAndre legal team assured us that you are nothing but a rogue information technology contractor. You hacked into their systems and manipulated the data to make it look like DeAndre was stealing. You are a temp worker, Gwen. You scrubbed floors to pay for your community college classes. You do not own a financial empire. We know the truth. And we are giving you one last chance to retract that fraudulent audit before I press charges against you." Catherine crossed her arms, her designer blouse wrinkled from panic. "Sylvia froze all the wedding vendor accounts this morning. The caterers, the florists, the venue. Everything is suspended until this investigation is cleared. DeAndre is furious, but he promised Madison that if you confess to hacking his accounts, he will convince his mother to let the wedding proceed. You owe your sister this, Gwen. You owe this family." "I owe this family absolutely nothing," I stated, rising from my chair. "Let us talk about what people actually owe. Let us talk about the second mortgage you took out on your house to fund Madison fake luxury lifestyle. The bank sent the official foreclosure notice via certified mail to your front door at 8 o'clock this morning. I know this because my company bought your bad debt. You are trespassing on my time, and you are officially squatters in a house you no longer own." Madison let out a loud, mocking laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "You are so delusional. DeAndre gave us the money to pay off that mortgage. The house is safe. You are just a bitter maid trying to drag everyone down to your pathetic level, because no man with real money would ever look twice at you." "You are marrying a man who framed you for federal wire fraud, Madison," I replied ruthlessly. "DeAndre used your digital authorization to steal $5 million from his African-American real estate dynasty. He is planning to flee the country, leaving you holding the bag. The fact that you are standing in my office demanding I save your wedding instead of hiring a criminal defense attorney proves exactly how stupid you truly are." Catherine slammed her hands over her ears. "Stop telling these vicious lies. DeAndre loves her. He comes from a powerful, respectable family. He would never steal from his mother. You are doing this because you have always been envious of Madison. We gave you a roof over your head, we fed you, and you repaid us by being a constant disappointment. You embarrassed us in front of Sylvia, and you are going to call her now to apologize. I walked around my desk, standing inches away from my mother. You cut off my college tuition so you could buy Madison a convertible. I worked 3 jobs and cleaned toilets to survive while you paraded her around country clubs. I am not calling Sylvia. I am not retracting a single word of that audit. And I am not going to stop the federal authorities from seizing every single asset you possess. Richard grabbed my arm, his grip bruising and desperate. You listen to me, you ungrateful wretch. If this wedding does not happen, we are ruined. The social fallout will destroy us. We will be laughingstocks. You are going to sign a retraction statement, or I will destroy what little reputation you have left. I yanked my arm out of his grasp, my eyes blazing with pure ice. You cannot destroy a ghost, Richard, but a ghost can certainly destroy you. Before Richard could unleash another empty threat, the glass door to my office swung open. The chime of the front entrance bell echoed through the tense air. We all turned our heads to see who had bypassed the receptionist. DeAndre stood in the doorway, his tailored suit looking slightly disheveled and stained with cold sweat. He gripped a heavy leather briefcase tightly in his trembling hands. His wide eyes darted frantically around my modest office before locking directly onto me. He did not look like an arrogant billionaire heir anymore. He looked like a terrified man who was rapidly running out of time. DeAndre stood paralyzed in the doorway of my cramped public intake office. His knuckles were white as he gripped his leather briefcase. But the second Madison saw him, she launched into her performance. She let out a dramatic, piercing sob and threw herself across the room, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. She buried her face in his expensive suit jacket, her shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. DeAndre. Thank God you are here, Madison cried out, her voice muffled against his chest. Gwen is trying to destroy our wedding. She hacked into your bank accounts and fabricated a massive lie to send me to federal prison. DeAndre blinked, his terrified expression rapidly morphing as Madison fed him the perfect excuse. He looked down at her fake tears, and I could see the exact moment his twisted mind grasped the lifeline she was offering. He wrapped his free arm around Madison, glaring at me with renewed venomous confidence. He stepped fully into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. The sharp slam echoed off the thin walls. You really stepped out of your lane this time, Gwen, DeAndre growled, his deep voice vibrating with hostility. Catherine immediately rushed to DeAndre's side, sensing the shift in power. She patted his shoulder, her face twisted into a mask of pathetic desperation. We tried to talk some sense into her. DeAndre. Catherine pleaded, her voice trembling. We told her that you and Madison are building a beautiful life together. But Gwen has always been fiercely jealous of her sister. She works in this miserable little office organizing temp workers, so she concocted this entire ridiculous hacking scheme just to ruin your engagement dinner. She is completely out of her mind. You must believe us, DeAndre. Our Madison would never steal a single dime from your family trust. Richard nodded vigorously, crossing his arms to puff out his chest. We raised Madison with strict morals, Richard declared, blatantly ignoring the fact that they were currently squatting in a foreclosed mansion. Gwen is the only failure in this family. She cleans houses, she scrubs floors, she does not own a financial empire. Sylvia was just confused last night because Gwen illegally manipulated some public banking records. DeAndre sneered, pulling Madison closer to his side. He lifted his chin, looking down at me. I know exactly what you are, Gwen, DeAndre sneered. You are a low-class, bitter woman who cannot stand to see her sister marry into real wealth. I remained seated behind my cheap laminate desk, watching their collective delusions spiral out of control. You are holding a briefcase full of panicked contingency plans. DeAndre, I stated coldly, refusing to break eye contact. You ran here because your mother froze your corporate access an hour ago. You know my audit logged your biometric retinal scan when you wired $5 million to Panama. You know the federal authorities are already mapping your offshore accounts. But instead of begging for mercy, you are hiding behind a crying woman who used your money to pay off her parents' secret debts. You are a coward pretending to be a king. Madison gasped, pointing an accusing finger at my face. Stop lying! Madison shrieked, her fake tears instantly drying up. DeAndre is the heir to a massive real estate dynasty. He does not need to steal from his own mother. You are the one who is going to prison for corporate espionage. DeAndre stepped forward, slamming his heavy briefcase onto my desk. You made a fatal miscalculation, Gwen. DeAndre threatened, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. We will drag your name through the mud until you are unemployable in every single state. I will personally ensure you spend the next decade rotting in a federal cell for defaming my future wife. Catherine clapped her hands together, a triumphant smile spreading across her wrinkled face. You hear that, Gwen? Catherine cheered, her voice grating against my ears. DeAndre is going to destroy you unless you sign a written confession right now. Richard leaned over the desk, his breath smelling of stale coffee and blind panic. Sign the paper, Gwen. Admit that you forged the audit to ruin the wedding, or you will lose everything. DeAndre smirked, reaching into his tailored suit jacket to pull out a silver fountain pen. He tossed it onto my desk. It rolled across the surface and hit my keyboard. Take the pen. Gwen, DeAndre ordered, his tone dripping with absolute arrogance. Confess to your crimes, and maybe I will convince my mother not to press charges. I looked at the silver pen, then slowly raised my gaze to meet DeAndre's furious eyes. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I picked up my encrypted tablet and tapped the screen twice. You clearly do not understand how federal auditing works. DeAndre, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. I terminated the contract this morning after submitting my final report to the authorities. I work for Apex Estate Holdings. We buy debt and we liquidate assets. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, Apex officially assumed control of the mortgage on Richard and Catherine's property. The deed belongs to me. They are officially bankrupt and you are officially under federal investigation. Madison let out another hysterical scream, stomping her foot on the floor. She is lying. Stop listening to her. We are getting married this weekend. We are going to have a beautiful life, and she is going to be completely homeless. DeAndre ignored Madison's outburst. He leaned closer to me, lowering his voice into a menacing whisper. You have absolutely no proof that I authorized that offshore transfer, DeAndre hissed. A digital photo can easily be altered. My legal team will tear your software apart in federal court. You are nothing but a common maid trying to extort a billionaire. I will ruin you, Gwen. I will make you regret the day you were born. You will lose everything. You are making a scene over money you no longer control, I replied calmly. You keep threatening to ruin me, DeAndre. But we know your mother froze your access to the family retainers. You cannot afford an attorney to crush me. You cannot afford gas for the vehicle outside. Your identity is tied to a bank account you looted, and now you are standing in a public office trying to intimidate the woman holding your execution warrant. You are a common thief. DeAndre slammed his fist onto my desk again. His chest heaved with heavy breaths, the thick veins in his neck bulging. You think you are invincible, he growled. You are going to burn for this. I will make sure the media knows you fabricated a cyber attack against an innocent family. Madison pushed past him, her tear-stained face twisted into an ugly mask. She is a jealous freak, Madison yelled, pointing her finger directly at my chest. She scrubbed toilets while I went to country clubs. She is trying to drag us down to the gutter. Call the police on her right now, coward. I shifted my gaze to my sister. I do not want what you have, Madison. You are engaged to a man who used your signature to steal $5 million. You are his designated fall guy. When federal investigators knock, he is going to point directly at you. And let us talk about our parents. I turned my attention to Richard and Catherine. You took out a second mortgage to fund her lavish lifestyle because you were too cowardly to admit you were broke. You threw me away because I refused to be a pawn in your fake society game. Now you are officially homeless, and your golden child is the reason you will lose your social standing. Catherine let out a gasp, clutching Richard's arm as her knees buckled. Richard's face turned a sickly shade of gray. Gwen, you must stop this immediately. Richard begged, his voice cracking. We can work this out privately. Sign whatever agreements you want. Just release the deed to the house and delete the audit files. There are no private negotiations, I stated. I reached under the edge of my desk and pressed the silent security button. I am not your daughter anymore. I am the chief executive officer of Apex Estate Holdings, and I do not negotiate with thieves. My time is extremely valuable, and you have exhausted every single second of it. The glass door to my office swung open. 4 massive security guards stepped into the room. The lead guard, a towering man named Jackson, locked his eyes on DeAndre. "Ma'am, do you need these individuals removed?" Jackson asked, his deep voice leaving no room for argument. "Yes," I commanded, gesturing toward the four of them. "They are trespassing on corporate property. Escort them out immediately. If they resist, you have my full authorization to contact the police and press formal trespassing charges." DeAndre spun around to face the guards. "Do not put your hands on me," DeAndre shouted, stepping backward. "I know the chief of police. I will have your badges." Jackson did not flinch. He grabbed DeAndre by the bicep, twisting his arm behind his back. DeAndre let out a yelp of pain, his leather briefcase slipping from his grasp and crashing onto the floor. The latch popped open, spilling empty folders across the cheap carpet. He was completely broke, carrying an empty briefcase just to keep up appearances. "Get your filthy hands off my future husband!" Madison shrieked. Two other guards instantly intercepted her, grabbing her by the elbows and lifting her feet off the ground. She kicked wildly, her designer heels thrashing as she screamed obscenities. Catherine sobbed hysterically as the fourth guard took Richard firmly by the shoulder, steering the weeping couple out of the office. I followed them into the reception area, watching with satisfaction. The lobby was packed with temporary workers filling out applications. Everyone stopped to pull out their smartphones, recording the elite untouchable family as they were dragged past the folding chairs like common criminals. DeAndre thrashed against Jackson's grip, his custom suit jacket tearing at the seam. "Do you know who I am?" DeAndre roared at the crowd. "Turn those cameras off right now, you're all going to be sued." Nobody stopped recording. Madison sobbed, her makeup smeared as the guards hauled her toward the entrance. Richard and Catherine kept their heads down, trying to hide their faces from the smartphones, utterly humiliated by their social ruin. The guards shoved the glass doors open, tossing all four of them onto the concrete sidewalk. DeAndre stumbled to his knees, ripping his trousers. Madison collapsed beside him, wailing into her hands. The doors clicked shut, locking them out in the cold. I watched through the glass as they scrambled to their feet, stripped of their power. I turned to my receptionist, smoothing my blazer. "Get a full cleaning crew in my office immediately," I instructed. "It smells like pure pathetic desperation." I walked back toward my private quarters, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace. Suddenly, my heavily encrypted phone buzzed sharply in my blazer pocket. It was a high-priority message from my lead financial analyst. The text read, "DeAndre just booked 2 one-way first-class tickets to Switzerland departing tomorrow night. He is trying to run, and he is using a stolen credit card registered in Madison's name." I locked the screen of my encrypted phone and slid it into my blazer pocket. A predatory smile formed on my lips. DeAndre was incredibly sloppy. Using the credit profile of the woman he was currently using as a human shield to book international getaway flights was a rookie mistake. It was the exact digital footprint my asset recovery teams feasted on. I walked back through the public reception area, pushing open the heavy glass doors to step out onto the freezing concrete sidewalk. My family was gathered near the curb, attempting to salvage whatever dignity they had left. DeAndre brushed dirt off his torn designer trousers, cursing while furiously tapping his dead smartphone. Madison leaned against a street lamp, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. Catherine frantically tried hailing a taxi that would not stop. When Richard spotted me stepping out of the building, his face twisted into absolute hatred. He shoved past pedestrians, marching directly into my personal space with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You think you have won?" Richard roared, his voice cracking with desperation and blind rage. "You think hiring a few thugs to throw us out of some pathetic temp agency gives you power over this family? You are a disgrace, Gwen. We clothed you, we fed you, and we gave you our esteemed name. I am standing here right now, officially disowning you. You are no longer my daughter. I will ensure every country club and elite circle knows you are a rogue, unstable contractor who fabricates corporate hacks. You will be blacklisted and penniless. I am wiping you out of our legacy forever." I stood perfectly still, letting the cold wind whip around us. "You cannot disown someone who fired you as a father 10 years ago," Richard I replied, my voice slicing through the busy street noise. "As for your legacy, you do not have one. You spent it trying to keep up with billionaires like DeAndre family. You financed a complete lie. Before Richard could unleash another pathetic threat, his cell phone began ringing loudly from his coat pocket. The sharp ringtone cut through the heavy tension on the sidewalk. Richard ignored it, keeping his furious eyes locked on my face. "Answer it, Richard," I instructed, coldly checking the expensive watch on my wrist. "It is exactly 10 in the morning. I am confident you are going to want to take that call. It is the culmination of your entire financial legacy." Catherine rushed over, grabbing his arm frantically. "Richard, answer the phone!" Catherine pleaded, her voice trembling with rising panic. "It is the private banking line. They never call this early, unless something is catastrophically wrong." Richard scowled, pulling the phone from his pocket and pressing it to his ear. "Yes, this is Richard," he barked, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "I am in the middle of an urgent family matter. What is so important?" I watched the exact second his entire world collapsed. His shoulders dropped. The arrogant posture he had maintained for decades instantly vanished, replaced by the frail stance of a ruined man. His jaw went completely slack, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to breathe. The smartphone slipped from his trembling hand, hitting the pavement with a loud crack, the screen shattering into a web of jagged lines. Catherine grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently. "Richard, what happened?" Catherine screamed, her voice bordering on pure hysteria. "What did the bank say? Tell me right now." "They foreclosed," Richard whispered, his eyes wide and vacant. "The bank executed the default clause on our secret second mortgage. They bypassed the standard grace period because the debt was purchased in full by an anonymous commercial holding company at 8 o'clock this morning. The new owner expedited the eviction protocol. The locks on the mansion have already been changed. We are locked out. Our clothes, our furniture, our entire life is trapped inside a house we no longer own. We are completely homeless." Madison let out a blood-curdling shriek, abandoning the street lamp and sprinting over to her father, who Madison wailed, stomping her feet against the concrete. "That is impossible. DeAndre gave us the money. He paid the bank. DeAndre, tell them you paid the bank." DeAndre backed away, looking like a trapped animal. He refused to look at Madison, his eyes darting desperately toward the busy intersection. I took a calculated step forward. "DeAndre did not pay the bank." "Madison," I stated, my voice echoing with ruthless authority. "He routed stolen money into your accounts, but my firm flagged the transaction for federal fraud before it cleared. The bank rejected the payment because it was dirty money. When the payment failed, the loan defaulted. That is when Apex Estate Holdings purchased the debt for pennies on the dollar." Catherine fell to her knees right there on the dirty sidewalk, sobbing uncontrollably. "You took our home." Catherine wept. "You bought our house just to throw us out. You are a monster." "I bought a toxic asset, Catherine," I corrected her. "But losing the mansion is your smallest problem today." I turned my gaze to DeAndre. "Going somewhere, DeAndre? Perhaps catching a flight?" Madison whipped her head around. "A flight?" Madison asked. "Where would you be flying to?" "I will tell you, Madison," I announced. "DeAndre is not marrying you. While you were throwing a tantrum in my office, he used his encrypted phone to book 2 one-way first-class tickets to Switzerland departing tomorrow night. He paid for those international flights using a stolen black credit card registered directly in your name. He is fleeing federal jurisdiction, and he generated a digital paper trail making it look like you are funding his escape. You are going to federal prison for wire fraud, and he is going to the Swiss Alps." DeAndre panicked. He bolted. He turned and sprinted down the crowded sidewalk, abandoning his ruined reputation and his screaming fiancée entirely. I watched DeAndre sprint down the crowded avenue, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the icy concrete as he desperately shoved pedestrians out of his way. He did not look back once. He completely abandoned his ruined reputation and his screaming fiancée without a single second of hesitation. Madison collapsed onto the freezing pavement, wailing his name, while Catherine and Richard hovered over her in a state of absolute shock. The scene was pathetic, a perfect representation of the shallow materialistic illusion they had spent decades building. I turned my back on them and walked through the heavy glass doors of my building, leaving their toxic drama out on the street where it belonged. The air inside the lobby was warm and silent. My security chief Jackson gave me a respectful nod as I bypassed the temporary worker intake area and swiped my encrypted keycard at the private stainless steel elevator hidden behind a marble partition. The doors glided shut, sealing me off from my former family completely. The elevator shot upward, carrying me away from the street-level storefront and directly into the beating heart of Apex Estate Holdings. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, the atmosphere shifted entirely. This was my true domain. The Executive Command Center was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but the real power was displayed on the massive digital tracking boards lining the walls. Dozens of elite financial analysts and forensic accountants moved purposefully between glass-enclosed workstations. They were tracking global markets, mapping offshore tax havens, and dismantling corrupt corporate structures in real time. As I walked down the central corridor, the ambient noise of rapid typing and hushed negotiations paused slightly. My staff stepped aside, offering brief, respectful greetings. I did not demand fear, but I commanded absolute loyalty. I had built this empire by recruiting the sharpest minds the financial sector had cast aside, and together we had become the most feared asset liquidation firm in the country. I entered my private glass boardroom and took my seat at the head of the obsidian conference table. My chief financial officer, David, immediately stepped into the room, handing me a freshly brewed espresso and an encrypted electronic tablet. "We have a heavy docket this morning," Gwen David stated, his tone crisp and professional. "The federal courts just approved our hostile takeover of the Vanguard shipping fleet. Their chief executive officer attempted to hide $300 million in a Cayman Island shell corporation, but our software intercepted the routing protocols before the funds cleared." I sipped my espresso, my expression remaining completely neutral. "Liquidate the entire fleet by noon," I commanded smoothly. "Sell the cargo ships to our international buyers for pennies on the dollar and distribute the recovered funds to the pension accounts they tried to steal from. Leave their executive board with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs." David nodded, swiping his own tablet to execute the order. "Done. Next, we have the luxury real estate portfolio in Miami. The developers defaulted on their massive loans and tried to leverage properties they did not legally own." I set my coffee down and pulled up the portfolio on my screen. I reviewed the multi-million-dollar assets: waterfront penthouses, private island estates, and commercial high-rises. "Seize all 12 properties immediately," I instructed, pressing my thumb against the biometric scanner on the tablet. My fingerprint authorized the massive transfer of wealth in a fraction of a second. "Evict the developers and auction the residential estates to the highest bidders. Transfer the commercial properties into the Apex holding accounts. We will repurpose them for our own expansion." It was effortless. With a simple biometric swipe, I dismantled corrupt empires and reshuffled billions of dollars across the global economy. My family thought I cleaned baseboards for minimum wage, but my actual daily routine involved wiping out corrupt billionaires before my morning meetings concluded. David cleared his throat, pulling up a highly restricted file on the main digital projection screen. Moving on to our active priority target, David continued adjusting his glasses. "The offshore accounts linked to DeAndre and his family trust. Our trace confirmed that the $5 million he wired to Panama is currently sitting in a holding pattern. We flagged the transaction with international banking authorities, so he cannot access the cash." "What about his flight?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. David smiled sharply. "He is currently booked on a commercial first-class flight to Geneva, departing tomorrow night. He used Madison Credit Profile, just as you predicted. I have already forwarded the ticket confirmation and the fraud alert to the federal authorities. The moment he attempts to scan his boarding pass at the international terminal, he will be detained for questioning regarding the stolen funds and the identity theft." I nodded, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. DeAndre thought he could outsmart the system, but he was walking directly into a federal trap. Madison faced severe legal consequences for blindly signing financial documents while my parents wandered the streets with zero access to their foreclosed mansion. Every single piece of trash had been swept into the incinerator. Before David could move to the next item, the The secure intercom chimed loudly. My executive assistant, Naomi, spoke through the speaker, her voice tight with unusual urgency. Gwen. I apologize for the sudden interruption, Naomi announced. But we have a highly unexpected situation at the private reception desk. A visitor bypassed standard corporate security protocols and took the VIP elevator directly to this floor. She demands an immediate off-the-books meeting with you right now. I frowned, annoyed by the breach in protocol. Who is demanding my time? I asked coldly. Naomi hesitated for a brief second. It is Sylvia, Naomi replied, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. DeAndre's mother is standing right in the front lobby, and she looks completely desperate. I pressed the intercom button, my voice giving absolutely nothing away. Send her in, Naomi, I instructed, and ensure no one else is on that elevator. The heavy frosted glass doors of my boardroom slid open a minute later. Sylvia walked in, but she looked entirely different from the composed, intimidating billionaire matriarch who had attended that disastrous engagement dinner. She wore a dark trench coat over a simple pantsuit, a stark contrast to her usual designer gowns. She clutched a leather handbag tightly against her side, her sharp eyes scanning the massive digital screens that lined my walls. I saw her taking in the sheer magnitude of my operation. The blinking global maps, the scrolling financial tickers, and the forensic banking software dissecting her family trust in real time. She was finally witnessing the true power of the Wall Street ghost. I did not stand up to greet her. I simply gestured toward the empty leather chair opposite my desk. Please have a seat, Sylvia, I said evenly. I must admit, bypassing corporate security is a bold move for someone whose financial empire is currently bleeding millions of dollars by the hour. Sylvia did not sit immediately. She walked slowly toward the table, her gaze fixed on the screen displaying DeAndre's frozen offshore accounts. She let out a long, ragged exhale, her shoulders slumping as the fight temporarily drained out of her. I am not here to fight you, Gwen. Sylvia stated, her voice thick with exhaustion. I am here because I have absolutely nowhere else to turn. My legal team spent the entire night trying to untangle the mess DeAndre created. They failed. The federal authorities are breathing down our necks, and the board of directors is threatening to vote me out of my own company if I do not stabilize our liquid assets by the end of the week. She sank heavily into the chair, placing her handbag on the polished oak table. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the surface. Your son authorized a $5 million wire transfer using my sister's stolen credentials, I reminded her ruthlessly. He was perfectly willing to let Madison rot in a federal cell so he could flee to Switzerland. He is a criminal, Sylvia. Why should I help you save the very empire he used to fund his pathetic escape? Sylvia looked me dead in the eye, stripping away all of her upper-class pride. Because if my family firm goes down, thousands of innocent employees lose their pensions. DeAndre was a fool. He let Madison manipulate him into paying off your parents' mortgage, and when he realized the federal regulators were tracking his accounts, he panicked. He thought he could pull cash from the emergency reserves to start a new life offshore. He is an arrogant child playing with weapons he does not understand. But Madison is a parasite, and your parents are currently threatening to go to the press. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued by this new layer of absolute delusion from my family. Threatening the press? I asked, pulling up a blank note on my tablet. What exactly are Richard and Catherine attempting to accomplish while squatting on a sidewalk with no money? Sylvia let out a bitter, humorless laugh. They called my private line an hour ago. Richard claims that since DeAndre used Madison's digital signature to execute the theft, the entire scandal is entirely my family fault. He is demanding a $20 million settlement to keep Madison from going on national television and painting DeAndre as an abusive, manipulative predator who forced her to commit wire fraud. They are trying to extort me to buy their mansion back from your holding company. My parents were truly spectacular in their boundless greed. They had just been thrown out onto the freezing pavement, totally bankrupt and publicly humiliated, and their immediate response was to attempt a multi-million-dollar extortion scheme against a desperate billionaire. They think they have leverage, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. They believe Madison tears will convince a jury that she was just an innocent victim in DeAndre's massive corporate heist. Sylvia slammed her hand against the table, her composure fracturing. It will destroy our stock prices, Gwen. If they go to the media with a sob story about a wealthy African-American dynasty terrorizing a poor defenseless young woman, the board will panic. The shareholders will completely liquidate their positions. DeAndre ruined our credibility, but your family is holding the match ready to burn the rest of my legacy to ash. You are the only person who holds the raw data, proving Madison willingly initiated that original transfer to save your parents' house. You have the leverage to crush their extortion attempt. I need you to step in and save my company from this nightmare. I sat back in my chair staring at the desperate woman across from me. She was offering me a golden opportunity. Sylvia wanted me to weaponize my financial data to annihilate my family completely, but I was not going to do it for free. I tapped my fingers against the mahogany table, calculating the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. I will fix your corporate mess, Sylvia, I announced, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I will provide the federal authorities with the exact digital footprint proving Madison and Richard are extorting you. I will protect your pension funds and secure your board position. But I do not work for charity, and I certainly do not offer my services without a guarantee of absolute control. Sylvia leaned forward, her eyes wide with desperate anticipation. Name your price, Gwen. Whatever your firm requires, I will sign the authorization right now. Just tell me what you want. I locked eyes with her, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the room was unbearable. I do not want your money, Sylvia. I want an absolute unconditional massacre, I commanded. Sylvia stared at me, the sheer gravity of my demand settling over her like a heavy shroud. She did not flinch, but I saw a flicker of raw apprehension in her dark eyes. You want to obliterate them completely, Sylvia stated, her voice steadying as she processed the magnitude of my ruthless proposition. You want to make an example out of your own blood. I stood up and slowly paced the mahogany conference table. They stopped being my blood the day they discarded me to fund a fake illusion, I replied. Richard and Catherine are attempting to extort you for $20 million because they believe Madison holds the ultimate victim card. If we hand over the audit files to the authorities now, they will spin a narrative of being manipulated by your son. They will claim DeAndre coerced Madison into signing those wire transfers. The media will devour the story of a powerful African-American real estate dynasty crushing a naive family. We cannot allow them to control the public narrative. Sylvia clasped her hands, resting them on her knees. So how do we stop them from painting my family as the predators? How do we turn the tables so completely that they never recover from the fallout? We let them have exactly what they want, I announced, turning to face her directly. We give them the wedding. Sylvia shot up from her chair, her professional composure fracturing instantly. Absolutely not, Sylvia yelled, her voice echoing against the glass walls of the boardroom. I am not letting my son marry a grifter who stole hundreds of thousands to pay off secret debts. I will not allow Madison to attach her tainted name to my family legacy. I raised my hand, silencing her outburst with a single sharp gesture. You are missing the bigger picture, Sylvia. Right now, Madison is just a desperate woman who signed a fraudulent wire transfer. But if she walks down that aisle, she will be required to sign a comprehensive prenuptial agreement and a binding marital financial disclosure. My legal team will draft those specific documents. By signing them, Madison will legally swear under penalty of perjury that she holds zero undisclosed debts and has committed no financial crimes against your trust. The realization slowly dawned on Sylvia. Her posture relaxed and a predatory smile crept onto her face. If she signs those documents while actively covering up the embezzlement, Sylvia whispered, her eyes widening with dark excitement, she commits a secondary massive act of federal fraud. I finished for her. But this time, it will not be an impulsive mistake made in the shadows. It will be a premeditated, heavily documented crime committed in front of hundreds of high-profile witnesses. The moment she signs that registry, she locks herself into a federal trap she can never escape. And because Richard and Catherine are actively leveraging that stolen money to extort you, their presence at the wedding makes them undeniable co-conspirators in a racketeering scheme. Sylvia walked to the window, looking out over the skyline. You are talking about staging a public execution, Sylvia murmured, sounding almost breathless. You want to gather elite society in one room to watch your family walk straight into a federal prison cell. I walked up beside her, looking down at the streets below. I want them to feel the exact same humiliation they tried to inflict on me. I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They want to play high society games, so we will give them the grandest stage imaginable. But you have to play your part flawlessly, Sylvia. You have to call DeAndre right now. Tell him the board demands a show of stability to prevent a shareholder panic. Tell him the wedding must happen in exactly 1 week to project absolute unity to investors. Sylvia turned to me, her sharp eyes studying my face with newfound respect. You really are the Wall Street ghost, Gwen. You do not just clean up financial messes. You orchestrate the entire demolition. She reached into her dark trench coat and pulled out her encrypted smartphone. I will make the call. I will tell DeAndre the engagement is reinstated, and he has my blessing to marry Madison next weekend. But finding a secure elite venue on such ridiculously short notice will be nearly impossible. I walked back to my desk and picked up my tablet. I already solved that problem, I replied, tapping the screen to bring up a newly acquired asset file. Apex Estate Holdings just finalized the hostile takeover of a private luxury castle located outside the city limits. The previous owners defaulted on their massive loans yesterday. It is completely secluded, highly secure, and features a grand ballroom large enough to host your entire guest list. I will grant you exclusive access to the property for the wedding ceremony. Sylvia let out a low, impressed chuckle. You thought of absolutely everything. She unlocked her phone and dialed her son, putting the device on speaker so I could hear the trap snap shut. DeAndre answered on the first ring, his voice frantic and breathless. Mom, please, DeAndre begged. I am trying to fix the routing issue. Stop talking, DeAndre. Sylvia commanded, her tone, shifting seamlessly back into the role of undisputed matriarch. I just finished a grueling meeting with the corporate board. The shareholders are threatening a massive sell-off because of your erratic behavior. The only way to stabilize our stock price is to project total family unity. The engagement is back on. You are marrying Madison next weekend. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Next weekend, DeAndre stammered. Mom, we do not even have a venue anymore. I am lifting the freeze on your secondary account, Sylvia lied. And I have personally secured a private luxury castle for the ceremony. You will inform Madison that the wedding is proceeding exactly as planned. Do you understand my instructions now? I understand completely. DeAndre replied, his voice hollow and completely defeated over the speakerphone. I will call Madison right now. Sylvia ended the call without another word. She pocketed her encrypted smartphone and looked at me. The trap is officially set. Gwen, Sylvia stated, her tone entirely professional. DeAndre believes he is saving the family stock prices, and your sister will believe she has successfully secured her billionaire lifestyle. I will ensure the guest list is notified of the venue change and the expedited timeline. Every major investor and socialite will be in attendance to witness this execution. I nodded, walking back to my desk to finalize the legal parameters of our ruthless agreement. My team will draft the binding marital financial disclosures, I assured her. I will have them delivered securely to the bridal suite on the morning of the ceremony. Madison will sign her federal confession while wearing her designer gown. Over the next 4 days, my surveillance teams monitored the absolute frantic desperation of my former family. The foreclosure of Richard and Catherine's mansion had forced them into a cheap extended stay motel on the outskirts of the city. They were completely liquidating their final hidden credit lines just to maintain the illusion of their upper-class status. Instead of hiring criminal defense attorneys to address their impending federal charges, Catherine and Madison poured every single ounce of their energy into the expedited wedding. I sat in my office watching their pathetic delusion unfold in real time across Madison's public social media channels. She was posting dozens of updates an hour, desperately trying to drown out any whispering rumors about her family's sudden eviction. She posted a live video from an exclusive bridal boutique downtown, twirling in front of a massive mirror. Zen, you believe DeAndre's family secured a private luxury castle for our ceremony this weekend? Madison bragged to the camera, her fake smile stretching from ear to ear. The venue is completely off the market, reserved only for true elite events. And look at this custom gown. It is a $100,000 masterpiece imported directly from Milan. DeAndre insisted I have the absolute best for our special day. We are so incredibly blessed to be merging our powerful families today. I muted the video, shaking my head at her boundless stupidity. She was flaunting a $100,000 dress purchased with funds DeAndre had stolen while her parents were currently living out of suitcases in a budget motel. They were so blinded by their toxic obsession with social status that they completely ignored the giant federal crosshairs painted directly on their backs. They thought they had outsmarted the system entirely. My chief financial officer, David, stepped into my office, interrupting my monitoring session. He carried a stack of heavily redacted bank statements and a tablet displaying the wedding's logistical footprint. They took the bait Gwen, David reported, setting the tablet on my desk. DeAndre's logistics team just finalized the catering and floral arrangements for the castle. Madison sent out digital invitations to 300 guests, including top-tier media outlets and local politicians. They are turning this into the social event of the entire decade. They are building their own gallows, I replied smoothly, swiping through the guest list. Madison wants the world to watch her marry a billionaire. I am ensuring they witness her federal indictment. Are the marital disclosure forms prepared for the signing? David handed me a sleek, leather-bound folder. The legal traps are ironclad, David confirmed. The documents explicitly state that the signer holds no undisclosed debts, has not engaged in any unauthorized wire transfers, and has zero knowledge of any embezzlement schemes involving the groom's corporate trusts. The moment Madison signs her name, she commits perjury and locks herself in as a co-conspirator. Excellent, I said, reviewing the harsh legal jargon. Have our undercover operatives infiltrate the catering staff. I want eyes on Madison the entire morning of the ceremony. I want absolute visual confirmation the second her pen hits this paper. No detail can be overlooked today. David nodded, making a note on his digital pad. The federal authorities are also on standby. We forwarded them the raw audit data confirming the initial $200,000 theft. The Financial Crimes Division requested a direct line to our security. They are prepared to move in the second you signal. I leaned back in my leather chair, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline. My empire was operating with terrifying precision. My parents spent my life calling me a worthless, low-class maid. They threw me out to finance Madison's fake reality. Now I was the undisputed puppet master pulling every single string of their total destruction. Their fake world was crashing down. My executive assistant Naomi walked in carrying a silver tray. Resting on it was a thick envelope bearing the seal of the State Real Estate Commission. Naomi approached my desk, her eyes flashing with triumphant excitement. The final asset transfer just cleared the state courts. Gwen, Naomi announced, lifting the heavy envelope from the silver tray and placing it directly into my hands. The previous owners vacated the premises yesterday afternoon, and our acquisition team has fully secured the perimeter around the grounds. I broke the wax seal on the envelope and pulled out the crisp, legally binding documents. It was the absolute, undisputed deed of ownership. I scanned the property lines, the tax assessments, and the official signature of the state registrar, transferring total authority to Apex Estate Holdings forever. I traced my finger over the bold lettering at the top of the page. It was the deed to the exact private luxury castle where Madison was planning to host her fraudulent wedding ceremony in less than 48 hours. I smiled, feeling the cold, raw power surging through my veins. They were planning a royal wedding, but they had absolutely no idea that I now owned the entire kingdom. The morning of the ceremony arrived with blinding sunlight piercing through the tinted windows of my armored sport utility vehicle. I sat in the back seat, parked discreetly on a ridge overlooking the massive stone courtyard of my newly acquired private castle. The manicured grounds were swarming with elite catering staff, armed valets, and oblivious socialites dripping in diamonds. David sat beside me, his eyes glued to the encrypted surveillance feeds streaming onto his dual monitors. Our undercover operatives had successfully infiltrated the event staff, planting high-resolution audio and visual recorders directly inside the bridal suite. The trap was fully armed. My secure earpiece crackled to life. It was the lead field operative disguised as a wedding coordinator. Target has received the marital financial disclosure binders, the operative whispered. She is holding the pen right now. She is not reading a single page. She just flipped directly to the signature line. I leaned forward, watching the live feed on David monitor. Madison sat in a velvet chair wearing her grotesque $100,000 custom gown. Her hair was piled high in an elaborate updo, and her face was plastered with an arrogant smile. Catherine hovered over her shoulder, sipping a glass of stolen champagne, completely oblivious to the federal perjury her daughter was committing. Madison gripped the fountain pen and scribbled her name across the bottom line of the legally binding document, officially swearing under oath that she held 0 undisclosed debts and possessed absolutely no knowledge of any financial embezzlement. "Got it," I announced, my voice dropping to a ruthless pitch. "The signature is locked. Print the copies and hand them directly to the federal agents waiting in the staging van." David tapped his screen, sending the green light to the Financial Crimes Division. The second her pen left that paper, Madison transformed from a desperate squatter into a fully documented federal felon. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense beneath the facade of extreme wealth. 300 of the most powerful real estate investors took their seats on gilded chairs. I monitored the live feed from the main hall. Sylvia sat in the front row wearing a severe emerald pantsuit. Her face was completely unreadable, a masterful performance of a billionaire matriarch, pretending everything was fine. Across the aisle, Richard and Catherine were loudly boasting to a group of confused hedge fund managers. Richard pointed to the vaulted ceilings, aggressively claiming his family had spared absolutely no expense to secure this exclusive venue. He was bragging about renting a castle that I legally owned. At the front of the altar stood DeAndre. The arrogant African-American heir looked like he was about to vomit. He tugged at the collar of his bespoke tuxedo, his forehead glistening with a thick layer of nervous sweat. He kept checking the gold watch on his wrist, mentally counting down the hours until his scheduled flight to Switzerland. He thought if he could just get through this charade of a ceremony, he could sprint to the airport, abandon Madison, and vanish with the $5 million he stole from his own mother. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom closed, signaling the beginning of the procession. The expensive string quartet began playing a slow, dramatic classical piece. The elite crowd fell silent, turning their heads toward the entrance. The doors swung open slowly, revealing Madison. She clutched a massive bouquet of rare white orchids, stepping onto the pristine white aisle runner. She lifted her chin, locking eyes with DeAndre, completely intoxicated by her own fake victory. She thought she had beaten me. She thought she had secured her billionaire lifestyle and outrun the consequences of her massive theft. "It is time," I commanded, opening the door of the sport utility vehicle and stepping out into the crisp morning air. I marched across the cobblestone courtyard, flanked by David, 2 federal financial prosecutors, and a squad of elite private security contractors dressed in tactical suits. We moved with terrifying synchronization, walking right past the confused valets and directly up the stone steps to the main entrance. The heavy oak doors of the castle ballroom were closed, but I did not bother knocking. I signaled my security chief. He grabbed the brass handles and violently yanked both doors open. The heavy wood slammed against the stone walls with a deafening explosive crash that echoed over the heads of the 300 startled guests. The string quartet instantly stopped playing, the screeching halt of the cello cutting through the room like a physical blade. Madison froze dead in her tracks halfway down the aisle, her jaw dropping open in sheer horror. Every single head in the massive ballroom snapped around to stare at the entrance. I stood in the doorway wearing a razor-sharp crimson blazer, radiating absolute authority. My security team fanned out instantly, blocking the exits, while the federal lawyers stood stoically behind me, holding thick briefcases full of indictments. I locked eyes with Madison, watching the triumphant smirk melt off her face, replaced instantly by raw, suffocating terror. DeAndre stumbled backward at the altar, knocking over a massive floral arrangement that crashed onto the marble floor. Richard and Catherine leaped out of their front row seats, their faces turning a sickly shade of gray as they recognized my face. Sylvia remained perfectly still in her chair, a dark, predatory smile finally breaking across her face. I stepped onto the white aisle runner, the sharp click of my heels echoing in the dead silent room. I did not raise my voice, but the cold command in my tone reached every single corner of the vaulted hall. "The ceremony is officially over," I announced, pulling a wireless microphone from my pocket that had been linked to the venue sound system. "Nobody is getting married today. But several of you are going to federal prison." Madison let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her orchids completely onto the marble floor. The sharp sound of the shattering orchid stems echoed through the cavernous ballroom. Madison fell to her knees, clutching the fabric of her custom gown, her face completely drained of color. The massive crowd of elite guests erupted into a deafening roar of frantic whispers and shocked gasps. I did not break my stride. I walked straight up the marble steps of the altar, bypassing a paralyzed DeAndre, and snatched the wireless microphone directly from the hands of the trembling officiant. I turned to face the sea of billionaires, socialites, and hedge fund managers. Silence fell over the room instantly. My security team secured the perimeter, standing shoulder to shoulder at every exit. "My name is Gwen," I announced, my voice booming through the venue speakers with absolute unapologetic authority. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Estate Holdings. You are all invited here today to witness the union of a powerful real estate dynasty and a respectable upper-class family. Unfortunately, you have been invited to a crime scene." I raised my left hand, signaling David at the back of the hall. He tapped his tablet. Instantly, the massive stained glass windows were obscured by motorized blackout shades. 4 high-definition projectors roared to life, casting enormous, unredacted financial records directly onto the towering stone walls of the castle. The harsh white light illuminated every single fraudulent transaction in massive black text for the entire room to read. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Sylvia sat perfectly still in the front row, a dark smirk playing on her lips as she watched her son sweat. "Let us begin with the bride," I commanded, gesturing toward the projected banking logs. Madison did not just marry into wealth today. Over the past 6 months, she has systematically embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the joint accounts she shares with DeAndre. She routed the stolen money through fake charitable organizations to mask her tracks. Madison scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is lying," Madison screamed, her voice cracking in pure desperation. "Turn those projectors off." She hacked the system. "DeAndre gave me that money. Tell them DeAndre." DeAndre took a massive step away from her, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "I never authorized those transfers," DeAndre lied smoothly, trying to save his own skin. "You stole from my family. You are a thief." I laughed, a harsh sound that cut through his pathetic defense. "Do not act like a victim, DeAndre," I warned him. "You are just as guilty." I nodded to David. The projection on the left wall switched to the biometric security photo of DeAndre sitting in his chauffeured car at midnight, along with the offshore routing protocols. DeAndre realized his mother was about to freeze his accounts, I explained to the captivated audience. So he used Madison Digital Authorization credentials to wire $5 million of his family trust into an untraceable account in Panama. He booked a one-way flight to Switzerland, departing tonight. He planned to leave his new wife holding the bag for federal wire fraud while he vanished with the cash. The crowd erupted again. Several prominent investors in the front rows immediately pulled out their phones, frantically texting their brokers to pull their funds from DeAndre family firm. DeAndre's face turned a sickening shade of gray. He looked at Sylvia, but his mother refused to even acknowledge his existence. "But Madison is not just a scapegoat," I continued, reeling the crowd back in. "She is an active, calculating predator." I pointed to the largest projection behind the altar. It displayed a massive federal loan application completely approved and finalized just 3 days ago. When Madison realized her parents were completely bankrupt and facing imminent foreclosure, she panicked, I revealed ruthlessly. She knew she needed an illusion of wealth to secure her place in this dynasty. So she went to a federal lending institution and applied for a massive commercial loan. To secure that loan, she used her parents' mansion as collateral. Richard and Catherine leaped up from their seats, their faces twisted in absolute horror. "You used our house!" Richard roared, his voice breaking as he stared at the federal documents glowing on the stone wall. "Madison, how could you do that?" "Because she is a sociopath," Richard, I answered for her. "But she is also incredibly stupid. She forged your signatures to pledge the estate as collateral. She committed severe federal fraud to secure millions in cash. But here's the brilliant part. She did not realize that the bank had already foreclosed on your property. She used a house she did not own to steal money from the federal government." Madison dropped her face into her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, Dad, I had to do it," Madison wailed, her voice echoing pathetically. "I had to keep up appearances. I had to make sure the wedding happened. I was going to pay it back once I had access to DeAndre Trust." Catherine collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. "We are ruined," Catherine wept softly. "We have absolutely nothing left." "You never had anything to begin with," I stated coldly. "You built a life entirely on debt, lies, and the exploitation of your own daughter. You cut off my college tuition so Madison could buy designer clothes. You told everyone I was a failure who cleaned houses for a living. You paraded around country clubs while dodging collection calls. And when your fake empire finally began to crack, you let your golden child commit federal crimes just to keep the lights on." I stepped down from the altar, walking slowly toward the center of the aisle. The entire congregation watched me in stunned silence. I held up the legally binding marital financial disclosure document that Madison had signed just an hour ago. This federal perjury just destroyed her entire pathetic life completely today. This federal perjury just destroyed her entire pathetic life completely today. Madison erupts into a violent, unhinged tantrum on the white aisle runner. She points a shaking finger at my face, screaming for the venue's security to intervene. "Remove her!" Madison shrieks, her voice echoing painfully through the grand ceilings. "She is ruining my wedding. Throw this jealous psycho out onto the street." The venue guards step forward, but my security contractors immediately block their path. The contrast between the local staff and my federal security team makes the guards back down. I hold my ground at the altar, looking down at my sister with a gaze so cold it could freeze the room. "Your wedding?" I ask, letting a sharp laugh echo through the microphone. "You really live in a fantasy world, Madison. You do not own this castle. DeAndre does not own this castle." David walks down the center aisle, the eyes of 300 billionaires following his move. He hands a heavy document directly to me, and I hold it up high. "This is the official deed of ownership," I announce, my voice ringing with undisputed authority. "The previous developers defaulted on their commercial loans. I executed a hostile takeover of this estate. I am the sole legal owner of this luxury venue." A massive shockwave rips through the seated crowd. Muffled murmurs turn into chaotic gasps. Sylvia sits perfectly still, a triumphant glint in her dark eyes, while DeAndre looks ready to collapse. "That contract was legally voided the exact second my firm acquired the property. You did not rent a venue. You broke into my house." I turn my attention back to the terrified, trembling bride. "You wanted to throw me out onto the street, Madison. That is incredibly ironic, considering you are officially trespassing on my property. This fraudulent wedding is canceled. Everyone is ordered to vacate the premises immediately." Madison falls hard to her knees, the heavy fabric of her stolen gown pooling around her. "No," she wails, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. "DeAndre, do something. Tell them she cannot do this. We are getting married today. You promised me a billionaire lifestyle." DeAndre refuses to even look at her. The arrogant African-American real estate heir looks entirely defeated, his dynasty status crumbling. He knows the federal authorities are currently mapping his offshore accounts. He knows his mother orchestrated this public execution alongside me. "I am not marrying you!" DeAndre growls, his voice shaking with fear and intense rage. "You are a federal criminal. You forged loan documents and used a foreclosed house as collateral. You are going to a federal prison." "You used me," Madison screams back at him, her flawless makeup ruined by thick streams of black tears. "You stole $5 million from your own mother. You tried to frame me so you could run to Switzerland." The elite guests watch the implosion with morbid, terrified fascination. "Gwen, you have gone too far," Richard roars, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. You are destroying our family name. You are humiliating us in front of the most important people in this city. You will retract these lies and let this wedding proceed now, or I will make you regret the day you were born. I look down at the man who called me a massive disappointment my entire life. You have no family name, Richard. You have bad debt, a foreclosed mansion, and a daughter facing federal perjury. Leave my property before my security team physically drags you out. Gwen, please. Catherine begs, her voice dripping with sheer desperation. We raised you. You cannot do this to us. If you kick us out right now, we have absolutely nowhere to go. The bank locked us out of the house. You told Sylvia I was just a house cleaner. I remind her, my tone completely void of any basic mercy. You cut off my tuition to fund her shopping habits. You chose your golden child, Catherine. Now you get to share her indictment. I raise the microphone to my lips one last time. This event is officially over. My security team will escort all guests to the main gates. Anyone who refuses to leave will be charged with criminal trespassing. The elite crowd immediately scrambles toward the heavy oak doors, desperate to distance themselves from the fallout. Nobody wants to be associated with a federal racketeering scheme. They push past each other, whispering furiously, entirely abandoning the lavish reception. Sylvia stands up from her front row seat, smoothing her severe emerald pantsuit with calm precision. She looks up at me, giving a sharp, approving nod, before walking calmly toward the private exit, leaving her son behind to face the music. DeAndre tries to follow his mother, sprinting down the center aisle, but two of my massive tactical security guards instantly step into his path. Get out of my way, DeAndre barks, trying desperately to summon his old arrogance. I am leaving. You are not going anywhere, DeAndre, I state, pointing toward the large arched windows overlooking the stone courtyard. The sound of wailing sirens suddenly pierces through the thick stone walls of the castle. Dozens of federal police cruisers pour into the main driveway, completely surrounding the venue. They block the main gates with heavy armored vehicles, cutting off any possible escape route. The trap is closed. DeAndre spins around, his dark eyes wide with absolute crushing horror. He looks at me, then at the flashing lights, realizing his flight to Switzerland is never going to happen. Madison lets out another scream, burying her face into Catherine's shoulder as heavy boots march up the stone steps of the castle entrance. The final reckoning has arrived. The heavy oak doors burst open for the second time today. A squad of federal agents in dark windbreakers marches into the grand ballroom. Their presence shatters the last illusion of this high society wedding. The lead agent holds up a thick stack of warrants. The flashing lights from the police cruisers cast harsh shadows across the vaulted ceilings. The remaining elite guests scramble in absolute panic. DeAndre watches his entire world evaporate. His billionaire groomsmen actively shove past him without making eye contact. One prominent venture capitalist stops, right in front of DeAndre. The man drops his crystal champagne flute onto the marble floor. You are a complete liability, DeAndre, the investor spits. My firm is pulling our investment from your family trust tomorrow. Do not ever contact me again. DeAndre stumbles backward as if physically struck. His shoulders slump, his arrogant posture completely obliterated. He watches his elite circle sprint out the doors, treating him like a highly contagious disease. He is officially a pariah in the only world he has ever known. Richard and Catherine realize the inescapable reality of their situation. The agents spread out, securing the altar and blocking Madison from making sudden movements. The absolute finality breaks my parents completely. Richard drops heavily to his knees on the pristine white aisle runner. Catherine collapses right beside him. Her expensive mother of the bride dress pools around her as she presses her palms flat against the cold marble floor. They literally crawl toward me, their faces contorted in raw, suffocating panic. Gwen, please, Richard begs, his voice cracking. You have to stop them. You know the federal prosecutors. You have the power to delete those audit files right now. We will do anything you want. We will sign the house over to you permanently. Just tell the agents this was a misunderstanding. Catherine reaches out, her trembling fingers wrapping around the ankle of my designer heel. She looks up at me with mascara streaming down her cheeks, completely abandoning her fake aristocratic dignity. We are going to be laughing stocks, Catherine sobs. Our friends will shun us. The country club will revoke our membership. You cannot let them arrest your sister. You are ruining our social standing forever. Gwen, please have mercy. I look down at the two pathetic people kneeling at my feet. I do not feel a single drop of pity. You do not have a social standing to save Catherine. I state, my voice dropping to a ruthless, icy register. You are broke, you are homeless, and you actively participated in a massive federal extortion scheme. You funded your fake lifestyle by bleeding me dry, and when I stopped paying you, let Madison steal from a billionaire. I am not stopping the authorities. I handed them the weapon. I kick my foot back, forcing Catherine to release my shoe. I signal my private security to step between me and my groveling parents. The lead federal agent steps up to the altar, completely ignoring Richard and Catherine weeping on the floor. She locks eyes with Madison, who is visibly shaking inside her stolen custom gown. Madison, the agent, announces, her voice carrying absolute legal authority. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. You are also being charged with forging federal loan documents and illegally pledging foreclosed property as collateral. Madison lets out a blood-curdling shriek. She scrambles backward, tripping over the massive train of her $100,000 dress. She crashes into the floral archway, sending white orchids raining down on her head. No, Madison wails, frantically looking between the federal agent and DeAndre. DeAndre, do something. You promised me a billionaire lifestyle. You made me sign those wire transfers. Tell them it was your idea. You stole the $5 million. DeAndre shrinks back against the stone wall, refusing to meet her gaze. I do not know you, DeAndre mutters, his voice shaking with cowardice. You acted entirely alone. My legal team will prove you manipulated my accounts. Madison screams in pure frustration, but her tantrum is immediately cut short. Two federal agents grab her by the arms, hauling her forcefully to her feet. The lead agent pulls a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. The sharp metallic click of the cuffs locking around Madison's wrists echoes loudly through the empty ballroom. It is the exact sound of a fake empire crashing down into dust. You have the right to remain silent. The agent recites, turning Madison around to face the main doors. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you by the state. Mom. Dad, help me. Madison screams hysterically, thrashing against the tight grip of the federal agents. Do not let them take me. Gwen, please, I am your sister. I watch with perfect, unwavering composure as they drag her down the white aisle runner. You are not my sister, Madison, I reply, ensuring my voice carries over her pathetic wailing. You are just a massive liability that I finally managed to liquidate. The agents march her out. The heavy oak doors hauling her struggling body down the stone steps of the castle toward the waiting armored vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights reflect off the tears streaming down Richard and Catherine's faces as they remain frozen on their knees. They are completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their absolute destruction. DeAndre slides slowly down the cold stone wall, putting his head between his knees. Realizing his own federal indictment regarding the offshore accounts is inevitably coming next month, the remaining elite venue is completely silent now, save for the wailing police sirens outside. The surgical strike is finally and undeniably complete right now. Every single toxic element of my painful past has been utterly and permanently neutralized forever. 3 months later, the sterile fluorescent lights of the federal district courthouse illuminated the final chapter of my family, total destruction. My sister sat at the defendant table, wearing a shapeless standard-issue beige prison jumpsuit. The vibrant arrogance that once defined her every action had been completely stripped away. Her hair, once styled by expensive salons, hung in dull, greasy strands around her pale face. There were no designer gowns today, no flashbulbs from society photographers, and absolutely no billionaire groomsmen waiting to rescue her. She was entirely alone, flanked only by a frustrated public defender. I sat in the back row of the gallery, my posture relaxed as I watched the judge review the sentencing guidelines. David sat beside me, occasionally checking his encrypted tablet to monitor our firm, ongoing liquidation of my parents' former estate. We had dismantled their lives piece by piece, And now the federal justice system was about to deliver the killing blow. The federal judge leaned forward, clasping her hands together as she stared down at my sister. Madison, you have been found guilty of multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and the falsification of federal lending documents, the judge announced, her voice carrying absolute, unwavering authority. Your crimes were premeditated, highly calculated, and driven by a staggering sense of entitlement. You used a foreclosed property to defraud a federal lending institution, and you embezzled funds from a corporate trust to finance an illusion of wealth. You have shown zero remorse throughout these proceedings, constantly attempting to shift the blame to your former fiancé. Therefore, it is the decision of this court to sentence you to 96 months in a federal correctional facility with no possibility of early parole. Madison let out a guttural, suffocating sob, collapsing forward onto the wooden defense table. She buried her face in her shackled hands, her wails echoing pitifully through the cavernous courtroom. Richard and Catherine sat 2 rows ahead of me, trembling uncontrollably as they watched federal marshals haul their golden child away. As the heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind my sister, the real legal bloodbath began. Sylvia rose from her seat on the opposite side of the gallery. The African-American billionaire matriarch wore a severe charcoal suit, her expression entirely devoid of mercy. She walked straight toward Richard and Catherine, signaling her elite team of corporate litigators to flank her. Sylvia had successfully isolated her son, forcing him to cooperate with federal investigators regarding his own offshore accounts to avoid a maximum sentence. DeAndre Fanny had completely severed all ties with my sister, the exact moment she was arrested at the castle, scrubbing her entire existence from their immaculate corporate records. Now Sylvia was tying up the final loose ends of this absolute disaster. Sylvia, lead attorney, stepped directly in front of my weeping parents and slammed a thick, heavily bound legal dossier onto the wooden bench right under their noses. Richard stared at the document, his bloodshot eyes widening in fresh terror. "What is this?" Richard stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "My daughter was just sentenced to prison. Have you not done enough to us?" "I am not finished with you, Richard," Sylvia stated, looking down at him with pure disgust. "That document is a civil lawsuit filed on behalf of my family corporate trust. You and your wife knowingly accepted stolen funds to pay off the second mortgage on a house you were hiding from bankruptcy courts. You actively conspired to extort me for $20 million, recklessly threatening to use the media to completely destroy my family legacy. I am going to freeze your bank accounts, garnish any future wages, and ensure you spend the rest of your miserable lives paying off a debt you can never clear. You cannot do this," Catherine pleaded, hyperventilating as she grabbed Sylvia's sleeve. "We have absolutely nothing left. Gwen Company took our house. We are living in a tiny roach-infested motel. If you sue us, we will not even be able to afford food. We will be bankrupt forever." "Then I suggest you get used to starving, Catherine," Sylvia replied flawlessly. "You tried to play a high-stakes game of corporate blackmail, and you lost. Consider this the cost of doing business with my family." Sylvia turned on her heel and marched out of the courtroom, her legal team following closely behind in a tight, impenetrable formation. Richard and Catherine were left completely paralyzed in the gallery, staring at the massive lawsuit that officially ended any microscopic chance they had of ever rebuilding their fake high society lives. I nodded to David, signaling that our objective right here was officially complete. My parents heard my approach. They slowly turned their heads, looking up at me with pale, pathetic expressions of ultimate crushing defeat. Their hands shook violently as they desperately gripped the wooden bench. Their eyes were hollow, stripped of all the arrogant pride they had weaponized against me for my entire life. They just stared, realizing that the house cleaner they had thrown away was the architect of their total annihilation. I did not stop to speak to them at all. I walked straight past their row without a single glance back, pushing the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom open. The bright, blinding sunlight of the massive city hit my face perfectly as I stepped out through the doors and into the bustling marble corridor. My secure phone vibrated heavily in my pocket, alerting me to a brand new message, but I ignored it entirely. I knew perfectly well that Richard and Catherine would inevitably follow me outside. They had finally reached the absolute bottom of the deepest barrel, and I was the only person left on Earth with the resources to pull them out. I slowly walked toward the grand marble staircase of the busy courthouse lobby, calmly preparing myself for the final desperate confrontation I had engineered and meticulously planned out from the very beginning. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors of the federal courthouse and stepped out onto the expansive concrete plaza. The crisp midday wind whipped across my face, but the bright sunlight felt like an absolute victory. I adjusted my designer sunglasses and looked down the sweeping marble steps. Exactly as I had predicted, Richard and Catherine were huddled near the bottom of the staircase, shivering in the cold. They looked entirely unrecognizable. The designer suits and custom-tailored dresses they used to parade around the country club had been replaced by cheap wrinkled jackets and scuffed shoes. They looked like two desperate strangers, but I knew the toxic greed still running through their veins perfectly well. Catherine spotted me first. She elbowed Richard, frantically pointing a trembling finger in my direction. They scrambled up the marble steps, panting heavily as they rushed to block my path. I stopped on the landing, folding my arms across my chest and staring down at them with absolute contempt. My private security detail immediately flanked me, but I raised a single hand, signaling them to stand back. I wanted to hear every single pathetic word my parents had to say before I closed this chapter of my life, permanently. They stopped a few feet away, completely out of breath. "Gwen, please, you have to listen to us," Catherine whimpered, her voice cracking as she clutched the lapels of her thin coat. "We waited out here for hours. The security guards would not let us back inside the building to see Madison. You have to help us, Gwen. We have absolutely nothing left. The legal team froze our remaining bank accounts this morning. We cannot even afford to buy groceries. We are living in a cramped, dirty apartment on the edge of the industrial district, and we do not even have money for the bus fare back home." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life calling me a massive disappointment. "You should have thought about your grocery budget before you decided to extort a billionaire for $20 million, Catherine," I stated coldly. "You played a high-stakes game of corporate blackmail, and you lost everything. Now you are standing on the steps of a federal courthouse begging for loose change from the daughter you actively threw away. You tried to use Madison to secure a massive payout, and instead you secured her a federal prison sentence." Richard stepped forward, trying desperately to summon his old arrogant authority. His face was a sickly pale gray, and his hands shook violently. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Gwen," Richard commanded, his voice lacking any real power. "We are still your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us basic respect. We are living in a cramped, filthy one-bedroom apartment on the worst side of the city. The heating unit is completely broken. There are cockroaches crawling out of the plumbing. We are elderly people, Gwen. We cannot survive there." I let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed across the marble plaza. "You are living in a dirty, cramped apartment," I repeated, my voice dripping with pure sarcasm. "That is incredibly fascinating, Richard. Do you remember where I lived when you abruptly cut off my college tuition to buy Madison a brand new luxury sports car? I lived in a damp basement studio with black mold growing on the ceiling. I scrubbed dirty public toilets for minimum wage just to afford ramen noodles and basic rent. You told me I needed to learn harsh reality." Catherine dropped to her knees right there on the cold concrete, weeping loudly as pedestrians walked past and stared. "We made terrible mistakes, Gwen." "I admit it," Catherine wailed. "We were blinded by Madison and we treated you horribly. But we are begging you for mercy. You own a massive financial empire. You control millions of dollars. You can easily afford to set up a small monthly stipend for us. Just $5,000 a month, Gwen. That is all we need to rent a safe apartment and buy food. It is absolute pocket change to you." I stared down at her pathetic, weeping form, feeling absolutely zero pity. "You are right, Catherine," I replied ruthlessly. $5,000 a month is absolute pocket change to my firm. I spend more than that on my morning coffee runs for the executive board. But I am not going to give you a single dime. You did not make a mistake. You systematically abused me for decades. You isolated me, ridiculed my appearance, mocked my career, and told your wealthy friends I was a worthless maid. You funded your fake elite lifestyle by stealing my future." His face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. He lunged forward, but my security guards instantly grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing him back. "You ungrateful, vicious sociopath!" Richard roared, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "We will go to the press right now. We will call every local news station and tell them the famous Wall Street ghost is a cruel monster who leaves her elderly parents to freeze and starve in the slums. We will ruin your corporate reputation, Gwen. No one will do business with a woman who tortures her own family." I smiled, leaning in closer so he could hear the absolute finality in my voice. "Go ahead and call the media, Richard," I challenged. "Tell them your tragic story. Tell them how your golden child Madison was just sentenced to 96 months in a federal correctional facility for bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. Tell them how you tried to extort his family to cover your own tracks. The trial is a matter of public record. The journalists will instantly pull the court transcripts and broadcast your disgusting financial crimes to the entire world. You are officially destroyed, Richard. There is nothing you can do to hurt me." Richard stared at me, the harsh wind whipping his thin, unkempt gray hair across his forehead. He opened his mouth to formulate another threat, another pathetic attempt to assert dominance, but no words came out. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He finally understood that his empty threats held absolutely no weight against a woman who controlled the financial narratives of billionaires. He took a stumbling step backward, his shoulders caving inward as the last shred of his fabricated aristocratic pride completely evaporated. Catherine, however, refused to accept her absolute defeat. She crawled forward on the cold concrete plaza, her knees scraping against the rough stone. She lunged toward the hem of my designer trousers, but my lead security contractor, David, immediately stepped into her path. He planted his tactical boots firmly on the ground, forming an impenetrable barrier between me and the woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel entirely worthless. "Gwen, please do not walk away from us," Catherine sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly across the busy courthouse square. "You cannot just leave your own mother groveling on the freezing pavement. We are blood. We share the exact same DNA. You have to forgive us. It is the Christian thing to do. If you just give us a second chance, we will prove that we can be a real family. We will never ask you for another dime after this initial stipend. Just give us enough to get a small house in the suburbs and we will disappear from your life forever." I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "You do not want a second chance, Catherine," I stated, my voice echoing with ruthless precision. "You just want a blank check. You want me to finance a comfortable retirement so you can sit in a suburban living room and pretend you are still part of high society. You want to erase the fact that your golden child is currently being processed into a federal penitentiary. You do not love me. You only love the bottom line of my corporate bank accounts." Richard dropped to his knees right beside his weeping wife, completely surrendering his final ounce of dignity. "We were wrong." Richard choked out, tears finally spilling from his bloodshot eyes. "We were so incredibly wrong about you, Gwen. We thought Madison was the one who would secure our legacy, but she ruined us. We see that now. You are the brilliant one. You are the successful one. We should have invested in you. Just let us show you how proud we are of the empire you built." "Your pride is completely worthless to me," I replied, staring at the two broken people kneeling at my feet. "You did not invest in me because you thought I was a bad asset. You cut off my tuition, kicked me out, and told your country club friends that I was a massive disappointment. You forced me to scrub baseboards to survive. You watched me struggle to buy groceries while you handed Madison the keys to a luxury sports car. You do not get to claim any pride in my success when you actively tried to orchestrate my failure." A sleek, armored black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb at the bottom of the grand marble staircase. The tinted windows gleamed under the midday sun. My driver stepped out immediately, walking around the vehicle to open the rear passenger door for me. The plush leather interior of the vehicle offered a warm, secure sanctuary away from the toxic wasteland of my former family. Catherine saw the car and panicked entirely. She tried to push past David, waving her arms frantically in the air. "Gwen, you cannot get in that car!" Catherine wailed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched scream. "If you drive away right now, we will die in that filthy apartment. The heating is broken. The water is brown. We have absolutely zero friends left. Everyone at the club blocked our numbers after the scandal at the castle. Sylvia destroyed our credit scores. We cannot even get a loan for a used vehicle. You are sentencing your own parents to a slow, miserable death. I walked slowly down the remaining marble steps, my security detail moving in perfect synchronization around me. I paused right beside the open door of my chauffeured vehicle. I turned my head looking back at Richard and Catherine for the absolute final time in my life. They were clinging to each other on the concrete, looking like discarded trash left out on the curb. I adjusted my designer sunglasses, shielding my eyes from the bright city sunlight. "You made your bed," I announced, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that commanded total silence. "Now you get to lie in it. You spent my entire adult life telling everyone who would listen that I was nothing but a low-class failure. You told Sylvia and DeAndre that I was an embarrassment to your fake elite legacy." I stepped closer to the vehicle, placing my hand on the pristine frame of the open door. I looked Catherine dead in the eyes, ensuring she heard every single syllable of my final sentence. "I am just a house cleaner," I stated with absolute ice, "and I have finally taken the trash out of my life." Catherine let out a blood-curdling shriek, lunging forward one last time, but David shoved her back firmly onto the pavement. I slipped into the spacious back seat of the luxury sedan, sinking into the soft heated leather. My driver slammed the heavy door shut instantly, cutting off the sound of my parents' pathetic, desperate wailing. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the busy downtown traffic. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not look back at the two ruined figures sobbing on the concrete. I simply looked forward. I simply looked forward. The sleek luxury sedan glided seamlessly through the bustling downtown traffic, leaving the federal courthouse and the pathetic remnants of my former family far behind in the rearview mirror. I leaned my head against the soft leather headrest, letting out a long, slow breath. For 32 years I had carried the suffocating weight of their toxic expectations, their endless criticisms, and their boundless greed. They had demanded everything I had to offer, offering absolutely nothing but relentless abuse in return. But as the city skyline blurred past my tinted window, that crushing weight completely evaporated. I felt lighter than I ever had in my entire life. I had surgically excised the cancer from my existence. There would be no tearful reunions, no hollow apologies, and absolutely no toxic forgiveness. I had drawn an impenetrable boundary with cold, hard steel, and I was never going back. The drive to the venue gave me a rare moment of absolute tranquility. I watched the vibrant city lights begin to flicker on against the fading twilight. This was my city now. I had conquered it not by marrying into a billionaire dynasty or by stealing from a corporate trust, but by building an undeniable empire with my own two hands. My encrypted phone vibrated against my leg. It was a message from David, my chief operations officer, confirming that the final asset liquidation of my parents' estate had been officially processed and finalized by the federal banking authorities. The slate was completely wiped clean. I smiled, sliding the device back into my pocket. The past was officially dead and buried. The vehicle slowed to a gentle stop outside the grand entrance of the elite Metropolitan Business Institute. Tonight was the annual Apex Industry Gala, an exclusive gathering of the most powerful financial titans, corporate innovators, and venture capitalists in the nation. Tonight I was not attending as an anonymous auditor or a hidden ghost pulling strings from the shadows. I was arriving as the undisputed guest of honor, the chief executive officer of the most feared and respected asset recovery firm on the eastern seaboard. My driver quickly stepped out and opened my door. I stepped onto the plush crimson carpet, the cool evening breeze catching the hem of my custom-tailored emerald gown. Flashbulbs erupted instantly from the barricaded press line. Reporters shouted my name, clamoring for a statement regarding the massive corporate takedown I had just orchestrated. I did not stop to answer their frantic questions. I offered a single razor-sharp smile to the cameras and glided past the velvet ropes flanked perfectly by my elite private security detail. The heavy golden doors of the grand ballroom swung open, revealing a breathtaking spectacle of extreme wealth and sophisticated power. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, luminous glow over the hundreds of elite guests mingling below. The moment I crossed the threshold, the ambient chatter of the massive ballroom hushed noticeably. Powerful executives, federal prosecutors, and elite investors turned their heads to acknowledge my arrival. They did not look at me with the fake, condescending pity my family had always weaponized against me. They looked at me with genuine, unadulterated respect. I walked down the grand staircase, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. David met me at the bottom of the stairs, handing me a crystal flute filled with rare vintage champagne. "You executed a flawless operation today," Gwen David stated, his tone brimming with professional admiration. "The federal authorities have officially remanded Madison to the maximum security facility, and Sylvia finalized the total corporate exile of DeAndre just an hour ago. The market responded exactly as you predicted. Our firm's stock evaluations surged by 15% this afternoon." I took a slow, satisfying sip of the crisp champagne. "Excellent work, David," I replied smoothly. "Distribute the promised bonuses to the entire asset recovery team tomorrow morning. They earned every single penny of it this week." As David nodded and stepped away to mingle with the federal regulators, a warm, familiar hand rested gently against the small of my back. I turned to face Ethan, the brilliant, fiercely intelligent cybersecurity architect who had designed the proprietary auditing software that powered my entire empire. Ethan was not just my top technical partner. He was my true companion, the man who understood the intricate, relentless machinery of my mind better than anyone else alive. He wore a sharp midnight blue tuxedo that perfectly complemented his calm, observant demeanor. He did not need to dominate conversations or diminish my achievements to feel secure in his own masculinity. He admired my ruthless efficiency, and he loved me for the exact same fierce independence that my biological family had always tried to crush. "You look absolutely magnificent tonight, Gwen," Ethan murmured, his voice a steady, comforting anchor amidst the swirling chaos of the elite gala. "I watched the news reports regarding the courthouse confrontation. You handled them with terrifying precision." I smiled, leaning into his supportive embrace. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of social ruin, Ethan. I simply provided them with the grandest stage imaginable. They tried to burn me to the ground, but they completely forgot that I am the one who controls the fire. Ethan chuckled softly, raising his own champagne glass to tap gently against mine. "You are a force of nature, Gwen. They never stood a chance against you." I turned back toward the dazzling ballroom, taking in the magnificent sight of the life I had ruthlessly forged from absolutely nothing. I had started at the very bottom, scrubbing dirty floors to pay for textbooks. They had called me a low-class maid. They had called me a massive disappointment. But I was the one standing in the glorious light of absolute victory. I raised my crystal glass high into the air, silently toasting to total unbreakable freedom and an incredibly powerful empire built